Welcome to the annual NIAS Lecture 2021. Thank you for joining us online as we go live from Pakhuis de Zwijger in Amsterdam.
We are here to listen to the voices of the people that lived in Amsterdam, known as the Black community of the 17th century.
In the middle of this city, under this green grass, this was the place you were seen last. Time buried your body, covered you in the past.
We staan hier in de tentoonstelling Refresh Amsterdam, een tentoonstelling over stadscultuur. En je ziet hier 25 hedendaagse makers die reflecteren op de stad van nu en het thema Sense of Place.
My barber asked me, he stated that he found it strange that he found it strange that when he walked the streets of our city, he would run into street names representing colonists and people who owned slaves, and that if he wanted to relate to his own heroes, his own heritage, he had to depend on certain museums.
The past has become the battlefield of the present. In particularly the radical right, permanently in a nostalgic mood, particularly the radical right wants to be proud of the Dutch colonial past. Their emphasis on the glory of the Dutch past seems related to how these radical right groups define themselves in the here and now. As natives of the country, their dominant position seems justified because of their historical belonging. Their past needs to be glorious in order for their position to sustain in the present. Their claim is thus not so much about the past, it is about the present. It basically tells Afro-Dutch citizens that their side of history is by no means as important as the imagined heroic past of the white Dutch.
All of these landmarks help position the Netherlands into becoming one of the 10 richest countries in the world at that time. Wow, I thought. These milestones were indeed much to be celebrated. Yet I couldn't help but wonder, as I was sitting there, positioning myself as a child of Surinamese parents and ancestors and a direct descendant of this particular colonial ancestral history, unlike many of my fellow classmates. And I asked, how was it that there was very little, or if any, mention of the Netherlands' colonial aspirations in expanding its empire across the Americas, like Suriname and Brazil and the Caribbean and North America, and of course Indonesia. How is it possible, I thought, to speak about the greatness of the so-called Golden Age and all the wealth that it produced for the Netherlands without also mentioning the wars on indigenous people around the world, the invasion and occupation of their lands, or without mentioning slavery, or only as something that happened far away. The Dutch royal family's golden carriage, the timpan on the palace of the Dam, Black Pete, World War II, and of course, on the other hand, other more stereotypical Dutch cultural elements like tulips and clogs and windmills. But I want to explore with you for a moment, what is this Dutch dominant narrative? What do we really mean by it? I want you to think of it as a way of being, a way of thinking and operating in the world. I'll give you some examples in my experience. Some about the attitudes towards race. One of the things I heard repeatedly was we are colorblind, we being the Dutch society. We don't see race, including that we don't see racism embedded in the symbolism of, for example, Black Pete, that's framed as innocent, a party for children, so therefore it can't be racist. As a nation, we are self-congratulatory about being tolerant and liberal, celebrating the first of many things, like the first to legalize gay marriage, or marijuana in the Netherlands is allowed for personal and recreational consumption. It's tolerated So that means it's been decriminalized and legal to buy in coffee shops. But what many people don't know is that marijuana is actually illegal in the Netherlands. So what does this new paradigm look like? How do we conceptualize a future gaze? If we do what we say we're going to do, how does that change, or will that change our worldview, our attitudes?
I believe my perspective can complement what Jennifer has just said. My claim is that, of course, we need to unveil and restore aspects of the past that have been hidden behind the walls of the selective forgetting of the past. The present is so difficult to decipher because of the existence of many different layers. History is one dimension of how we perceive these layers. Amidst these layers, our perceptions of the past can include, but they also can exclude persons or group of persons. So history is important because it plays a central role today in excluding certain groups on the basis of how we see them fit or not to belong to our common history. This emphasizes the extent to which using the past today is driven by considerations from the present time. And this has important moral and political consequences in terms of equality, in terms of inclusion and exclusion.
This framing of historical events is nothing out of the ordinary. Historian Ludmila Jordanova tells us, and I quote, "The past is everywhere. It is constantly being used and reused, and ideally is not appropriated by special interests." She also writes, "The creators of much public history tend to be drawn from small cadres with highly specific agendas, even if they claim to be acting in the name of wider groups. Accordingly, political elites tend to be past masters when it comes to representing and indeed manipulating the past." Following Jordanova, one might easily conclude that political elites should treat history as a concept that should be examined solely in the edifices of academia, by skilled historians who are trained in judging facts and sources and who uphold a professional ethical code. That historians should always speak out when people in power abuse history for political gain. However, we should not conclude that governments must leave history entirely to the historians and the museums. This is simply because history is omnipresent. We might pretend to ignore it, but historical ignorance is perhaps just as much an abuse of the past as misrepresentation is.